Okay, good morning, guys. Today we're going to start short and sweet. My new expression for 2020, short and sweet. We're going to talk about modernism, the movement of modernism. So, for some classes, this will be a brief review. The other classes, I'm tackling something totally new for your education. So, let's start this way. I'm going to start with Google Classroom, and I'm opening up the screen. There we go. So in Google Classroom, you have a folder marked Modernism. Today, out of this folder, I'm only using the first item, Evolution of Modernism. After I describe this, I'm going to shift over to the class website, and then I'll show you some documents there. Okay, so this is day one of modernism. We hope to end up at Eliot's Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock later this week. Okay, so for now, the whole point of modernism. Let me open up this PDF. Okay, here we go. So this is the evolution of modernism. Currently, today, in contemporary society, we're over here under what's termed meta-modern. Modernism as a whole, the general term, started up at the far left where it says modernism. It began in the late 1800s. I like to say it officially started in the 1900s. You had a new century starting up, a new attitude, a new approach to life. If you're taking a history course in college, they may have a specific date in the late 1800s, however, FYI. So just as a quick overview, going down the column, some quick ideas to keep in mind. The whole concept of modernism was a sudden acceptance that the universe is not understandable, it's ever-changing, and it's chaotic. Nothing is planned. For the most part, people were acknowledging the point that humans are not the center of the universe, nor were they intended to be the planet caregivers. If anything, we were doing things to nature hopelessly wrong, as global warming today will be as evidence. This third point here. In the arts, modernists seek new definitions of experience. That in itself, if you carry that with you for the rest of the course, that is a major thing to remember. The whole manner of how artists connect to creating their works, showing experience. In Chaucer's time, before Chaucer, but during the 1300s, the whole concept was to show you how you were supposed to behave. You were artists and writers were generating cardboard stereotypes of proper behavior. As far as the modernists are concerned, they want you to know what it's like to experience being somebody who is real, not a cardboard cutout. So, in a very aggressive fashion, a modernist is shifting the cultural understanding of art. Some basic people you'll note under poetry, I have T.S. Eliot, I have Ezra Pound, I have E.E. Cummings, and William Carlos Williams. There are others. These are just my favorites as examples. In fiction, of course, you have the American William Faulkner, the Englishwoman Virginia Woolf, and the Irishman James Joyce. These are the gods of modernism. Their work is very dense, it's very complex. Again, it's all about how to experience being a character, how a novel can translate experience of reality. Okay. So for the most part, right here where it says artist will, I'll quickly go through this. You're defying expectations. You say one thing, you create another. And I'll have an example about that in a second. You're promoting what's called fragmented imagery. Again, I'll have an example. You'll utilize multiple perspectives. And despite the fact that you have a lack of restraint, in other words, you are not holding back, you will use colloquial language, you will use curse words, you will show what it's like to be a real person, those Freudian psychological little thoughts that pop in your head without warning. You're showing all of that. You are not holding back. That's what I mean by show lack of restraint. Despite these 4 bullet points, it makes it sound very chaotic. However, when you look at the work as a whole, you do get a sense of harmony. You get a sense of connection. You get a sense of a flowing story. It will be difficult reading. But once you get the pattern, there's a pattern, it will make more sense. So that's these next few days, look for a pattern. Look for bridges. Look for connections. If you can't find it, tell me. I will tell you where it is. The next bullet point, you're promoting a lack of traditional formulas. So you are, as the quote down here says, tradition is a guide and not a jailer. In other words, you can use the past writing conventions and all the ideas of the past, but you're putting it into a more contemporary, modern concept. You're reinventing the old and making it new again. So you can borrow from cultural history of the past, but you have to reinvent your connection, your personal connection to the culture. And admittedly, what you'll end up with is a collage-like result. They love the use of what's called interior monologues. They love the use of stream of consciousness. You're capturing the thought process of a fictional character so that the reader can understand what it's like to be another person, to be a lower class woman struggling as a maid in a manor house that she is forced to work in. That type of logic. Okay, now, so that column is the beginning of modernism. Shifting to the course website, right here where it says demo chart, I just showed you that. Okay, so let's simplify the whole concept of modernism a little more. Right here, I have a poem by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. You have heard of this poem. You might not remember it, you might not recall it, but you have heard the phrase, "How do I love thee? Let me count the ways." This is an example of Victorian love poetry. Victorian period was right before modernism. In the Victorian period, literature is very traditional. It follows a pattern. It fits the pattern. Your skill was to show how easily a writer, you as a writer, can fit into the pattern. You did not break the rules. You follow expectations. Okay, so the example up here, again, you're following expectations. This is what is called a sonnet. And with a sonnet, whenever you, it's supposed to be one about love. It had to rhyme. It had to follow a formula. And it had to be comprehended quickly by the masses. So I'm not going to read it out loud, but the first sentence, the first quatrain, the first 4 lines, I'll read that much. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach, when filling out of sight for the ends of being an ideal grace. Okay, some quick observations. 1, it has an obvious rhyme scheme. 2, it has an obvious meter. It sounds like a song. This is an example of perfect iambic pentameter. Each line has exactly 5 count. Browning is using what is called an Italian form. So she's meeting all the expectations. And if you look at the bottom right here, she even brings God into the equation. You also have an I voice, this I. You know the narrator is the poet. You're assuming the I is the poet. So for the Victorians, that was fine. That was handy. And another way of looking at it, all of this, the whole poem, these are the poet's impressions. These are the poet's feelings. And another thing to point out, almost every line has the word love. So you know what the theme of this is. Love. Short, sweet, and simple. She's asking the question, she's giving you the answer. That's what the Victorians wanted. On the flip side, modernists wanted a change. They did not want poetry to be boxed in and just handed to you. You read it and toss it aside and find something new to read, and then you just toss it aside. They wanted a buildup of connection between the reader, the poem, and the poet. Okay, so again, this is all about experience. How to take in new experience. Okay. If you look at the 2 columns I have here, you've got the 19th century, basically the 1800s, and you've got the 20th century, the 1900s. Like I said earlier, the view of the universe had changed radically in the 1900s. We discovered the universe is not as perfect or infinite as we once thought. The belief at one point where it says rational order to the universe, we believed at that time the universe was static, non-moving. You had, like a clock, the gears in a clock. The clock itself is stable, but the gears are the only thing moving, and the hands. Okay? That's how they viewed the universe. So in the 1900s, the more science got involved with the process, we discovered asteroids are separate from planets, which are separate from the stars, which are separate from the galaxies themselves, which are separate from the solar systems and the billions and billions of ingredients in the whole works. They're not working together to hold the universe together. It's chaotic. Strange things can happen at a minute's glance. Okay. So to sum up these last few points here on either side, they're total opposite. Remember World War I, which I have down here. World War I is the major shifting in thought. So to keep it simple, people were reacting to how could God allow a world, our world, the earth, to be totally consumed in war. So that's where you're shifting away from a faith, a a strong sense of faith in religion or in the nation where you live. So when I say lack of faith, that's an extreme lack of faith. People don't know what to believe anymore. So as a consequence, you have a collapse of morality. You've heard of the term the swinging jazz era. 100 years ago, jazz was beginning up, and it was considered very inappropriate. So, of course, you had a lot of young people jumping on the jazz scene. Likewise, there's a fluid division between the classes. So what I mean is you could be born lower class and through the stock market or through investments or through wise spending, save up money, you can move up the ladder. Whereas before, you never were expected to move out of the class you were born. And you never tried to move out of the class that you were born. You accepted where you were. So ironically, as much as you have all this shifting over here under the 20th century, this more chaotic and fluid way of viewing the world, you are more open-minded. You are willing to take on risk and changes in your thought process. But people are more pessimistic. Humans could destroy the world, basically. Society could collapse and have to rebuild itself again. So more than once, and more than one example of the 1900s, produced this pessimism. So starting with World War I, consequently you had World War II. From World War II you get the atom bomb. From the atom bomb you get the Cold War. You get the Vietnam War. So forth and so on. All these various development of progress and technology are impacting how we feel. And artists, specifically the 1900s, were feeling dehumanized. They were losing their sense of humanistic values. Okay. So give me a second while I shift here. So I'm winding down now. Just as a quick example of where poetry shifted. This is E.E. Cummings. Compare this with what I showed you from Elizabeth Barrett Browning. When you look at this poem, first glance, it looks off. Something's wrong. And then the more you examine it, the more you realize it's defying any expectation of what a love poem is supposed to be. Case in point, the opening voice, the narrator, the persona speaking, is showing himself or herself in a lowercase I. Likewise, there are no major punctuation at the end of each line. On occasion, you will have a comma, you will have a semicolon, and here's another comma. But you have no periods. So the method that E.E. Cummings is using, this lack of punctuation, plus the theme, this is a love poem, connect together. And what it ends up with, love is eternal, love is ongoing, his love, if the persona is a he, his love is strong enough to continue eternally. Okay? So the presentation of the poem works with the theme of the poem to give you the experience of this persona. Okay, so when you're this is one of the more standardized, for lack of a better word, easier poems of E. Cummings. He did get really radical, and in a future lecture I'll show you one. But for the most part, I'll read this one out so you can see how it flows. You will hear a rhyme. There is a meter in here. It's disguised, just like the rhyme scheme is hidden. But so at first glance, it's breaking the formula for a love sonnet. At the same time, it's adhering to certain qualities of a love sonnet. So anyway, let me go through it. I carry your heart with me. I carry it in my heart. I am never without it. Anywhere I go, you go, my dear, and whatever is done by only me is your doing, my darling. I fear no fate, for you are my fate, my sweet. I want no world, for beautiful you are my world, my true, and it's you, whatever a moon has always meant, and whatever a sun will always sing, is you. Here's the deepest secret nobody knows. Here is the root of the root, and the bud of the bud, and the sky of a tree called life, which grows higher than soul can hope, or mind can hide. And this is the wonder that's keeping the stars apart. I carry your heart. I carry it in my heart. So what it all comes down to, again, the persona is radically in love and wants you to understand what it's like to be himself in love. Okay, so this is modernism. Aside from breaking tradition with presentation, it's breaking presentation with theme, it's trying new territory, it's experimental. It is no way traditional. Okay, so again, it's taking the history of the sonnet and producing a new sonnet. So this does adhere to the sonnet rules. Okay, so now that will be it for the day. There's no discussion questions for this material. Do go over it again, examine it again. Let me know if you have any questions. But for the most part, the takeaway, modernism is experimental. You get away with a lot of breaking and reformatting and fragmenting of themes, new ways of looking at writing and poetry in general. Okay, so we'll move on within the modernism and go to two other quick examples I'll have for you next time, and we'll start breaking down T.S. Eliot's Love Song of J.F. Prufrock. So again, stay safe, and if you need anything, just let me know, either email or the office hours, which are coming up on Tuesday and Thursday. Take it easy.